Hey folks, it's Katie. Welcome to this week's census update. We are going to get started very soon. We're getting it live on Facebook right now, and then we'll probably give it another minute or so for folks to be able to tune in via Zoom and on Facebook as well. But thank you so much again for joining us today, and we'll get started in just a minute or so. All right, friends, we are going to go ahead and get started. I know that we have a full house on our Zoom webinar, and I imagine our Facebook Live is also getting some viewers and attendees. But welcome, everyone, to this week's Texas Count Census Update. Today is September 28th. I imagine many of you are joining us today, given all of the changes with the 2020 census. We will start right with that information at the beginning of today's presentation. But of course, I want to introduce my two amazing co-presenters as well. We have Dr. Lila Valencia from the Texas Demographic Center. She will be going over the self-response data in Texas and also just response data in general. Genesis Sanchez from the Leo Educational Fund, she'll be walking us through some operations updates as well as sharing some really great resources that y'all can continue to use as you get out the count. And then again, my name is Katie Martin Lightfoot, and I am with Every Texan, and I will be sharing today's update regarding the timeline as well as some other really great resources and tools that you can use to get out the count. And really excited today to be joined by Robin Paoli from Bibliosoul. She is one of the masterminds behind the Texas Counts communication strategy, and she's going to join us today to walk us through what are some of those key things that you want to be sharing on your social media channels this week. As always, if you do have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to use the comment box or the Q&A box as well. If you are joining us on Facebook Live, please you know that you can use the chat box there as well, and you'll be able, we're monitoring that, and so if you do have any questions, comments, we'll be able to field those and share them on the update. But without further ado, we are going to go ahead and get started. Oh, and I already walked through the agenda, but here's the agenda if you're curious what our order of everything was for today. Okay, let us start with our 2020 census special update. So I know many of you have been in the know about this case happening in regards to extending the 2020 census deadline. So last week, I believe it was last Thursday, a federal judge in California, Judge Koh, ordered the 2020 census counting to be extended through October 31st nationwide. So this would be blocking the Trump's administration to end the count early, AKA this Wednesday, September 30th. When this was originally reported, this was the article that went out. Pulled some information, or I quoted Hansi Lo directly from his article, just with a little bit more information about how the federal court has ordered the Trump administration to stop attempting to stop the count in the United States. And this preliminary injunction issued on Thursday by the U.S. District Judge Lucy Koh in the Northern District of California requires the Census Bureau to keep trying to tally the country's residents through October 31st. At this point of time, when it was shared and published, the Justice Department had not yet appealed this case or this order. spoiler alert, they have, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But that was kind of that initial reporting in terms of what was happening. And so as of right now, we're talking about an October 31st deadline, but I do want to dig a little bit deeper into that. In addition, the Census Bureau did share a statement on September 25th about the 2020 Census Court Order. Essentially, they were just saying that, yes, we were going to comply, but I do want y'all to know that Judge Koh did not specify a new operational plan and schedule. So we're going to have to wait from the Census Bureau to see what they're planning to do, what those future statements are going to look like, about how they're going to be proceeding operationally. And if you work closely with the Census Bureau, you know that they have kind of been on a process of letting go of staff. And this has been in the plans for a really long time now. And so as you can imagine, with this extension, there's probably a lot of kind of behind the scenes things that are happening in terms to comply with this order. But like I said, we haven't gotten any operational updates directly from the Bureau yet about how they're going to be handling the Census Court Order. Moving forward, I thought the best way to share out this information is through Hansi Lo Wang's Twitter account. Again, he is the census guru. He knows the census inside and out and has amazing reporting. So if you're curious to kind of stay in the know, make sure you're following him. But as we expected, the Trump administration did say it was going to appeal the court order that was going to extend the 2020 census, counting to the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. And so again, this just makes it really confusing for us because we're not exactly sure at this point in time when counting is actually going to end. In addition to that, the Trump administration says if the U.S. District Judge does not temporarily suspend the order, they're again going to ask the Ninth Circuit for basically to intervene. So moral of these tweets, the administration is appealing the decision. And then with that, it should probably not come as a surprise. They did ask Judge Koh to suspend it. She said no, thank you. And since then, the Trump administration has formally asked the Ninth Circuit to immediately suspend the lower court order that extends the deadline. And so the lower court order is that of what Judge Koh put forward with the October 31st deadline. So again, with all of this information, I think this tweet really just sums up today really where we're at in this story in terms of these court cases. So there might be 2 days left, or there might be 33 days left to be counted for the 2020 census. So again, this is all depending on what the courts decide. So kind of this story of the court hearings that I just shared, but also what Congress might decide to do, because there's definitely been some movement in Congress to extend the deadline. Obviously, nothing has been decided yet. But really the message is that currently our households can still respond to the 2020 census, but unfortunately the deadline in terms of when folks can respond is very uncertain. And so with that, I did want to share out just some best practices and recommendations from Texas Counts based off of recommendations that come from Census Counts, which is an amazing national group that brings together census champions and advocates to promote the count. And they have just been really amazing leaders in this work. And so with that, really what we as census champions, as advocates, as folks engaged in the census work need to remember is that we need to keep the urgency of responding to the 2020 census deadline. And that is because we don't exactly know when it's going to end at this point in time. So first and foremost, we need to continue to get out the count through the current deadline of September 30th, 2020, AKA this Wednesday. I know many of you have had plans to do maybe some events this week, some social media blasts or campaigns, maybe some Facebook Live events, whatever you had planned to promote the 2020 census this week. Please keep pumping at all cylinders, keep everything going forward as much as possible. Again, there is that urgency because the census could end on Wednesday, but we just don't know. And we want to make sure that our community still feels empowered to respond to the questionnaire now, and they feel that urgency behind it as well. In addition to that, we want to continue to promote self-response. So again, this means responding online, over the phone, or by mail. And the message here is, of course, that the census is safe, quick, easy, and urgent. I know Dr. Valencia is going to go into the data a little bit more and talk about why self-response is so important, but the self-response data is the most accurate data we can get about our households to make sure that our communities have the funding and resources and information representation they need to thrive. And so during these last couple of days of September, let's continue to promote a self-response to our communities, and again, reminding them that it is safe, quick, easy, and urgent to fill out the questionnaire. And last but not least, and this is kind of a bit of a difficult one, we do want to start preparing for a possible extended data collection period through October 31st. And so while we have a lot of urgency around the September 30th date, we also need to recognize that hopefully that we're able to extend this count and we're able to continue counting members of our community. But the caveat of this is we don't want to publicly promote the new deadline with our communities. This means that we don't want to be, at this point in time, we do not want to be creating new graphics that talk about an October 31st deadline. We don't want to be going to community events, letting folks know that they have another month to respond. Because at this point in time, on Monday at 12:13 p.m. Central, we do not know when the count is going to end. And we don't want to continue to confuse our communities with new deadlines. We've already done that a little bit already this census season due to COVID. And so right now, let's continue pushing September 30th. And then once we get to October 1st, which I'll talk about towards the end of today's presentation, we'll talk a little bit more about what that messaging might look like going forward if we can and hopefully do continue this count into the month of October. But for now, let's not publicly share the October 31st deadline when we're promoting the 2020 census in our communities. Let's again talk about the urgency of completing the census by self-responding to the census by September 30th. And with that, I am going to pause to see if we do have any questions, comments, thoughts, or concerns. Texas Counts did send out a e-blast last Friday with these recommendations in it. But as always, we'll make sure that you all have these slides as soon as possible. I'm actually planning to send them out right after this presentation, just because I know there's a lot of really important, relevant information. But again, I'm going to pause right there before I pass it off to Genesis.
Hey, Katie, there's a question. I'll read it out for you if you'd like. Not to add to the confusion, but is there a chance it could fall somewhere between October 1st and 31st?
Yes, it could. So that is why, again, when we talk about the urgency, the census could end September 30th. It could end October 7th. It could end October 19th. We just don't know yet. And that is why I'm reiterating the fact that we're really pushing September 30th. And then once we start getting into October, it's almost like a new adventure every day to see what the courts are able to do. But again, the court decision could come down today, and this could just halt these efforts to extend the 2020 census. So again, we're planning to keep you all updated as new information comes in. But yeah, I think a good way to look at it, it's not necessarily either September 30th or October 31st, because I imagine that there's going to be plans to continue to stop the census if it does start, if the deadline is October 31st.
Following that question, there's a few comments. Katie, I'm going to keep reading.
I got them. Thank you, Genesis.
Okay, cool.
I can see these for whatever reason. So Joe asks, if Ninth Circuit supports district court, will the Trump administration appeal to the Supreme Court, and what is the timeline on this? Joe, without getting too much into administrative constitutional law, because I'm not a lawyer, that is definitely a possibility. In terms of the timeline, this is, again, where it gets really frustrating. I will say it's frustrating because we just don't know we just don't know where this case is going to be going. And so, like I said, this is me directly quoting Hansi from his Twitter page. He was saying, like, in theory, as soon as today, there could be, like the Ninth Circuit could make a decision. And so with that, again, we just have to continue to stay in the know, because we really, at this point, we don't have a timeline or a deadline in place. The only thing that I think is really increasing the urgency to move this through the courts for the Trump administration is knowing that originally, obviously September 30th is this week, it's this Wednesday, so that might speed up the process. But unfortunately, I can't answer that question, but it could go up to the Supreme Court. Dr. Edwards shares that their census partners have already been released. This is true. A lot of Census Bureau employees were released over the past couple of days. I think maybe for a lot of them, the 26th or 25th was their last day. And again, I think that just reiterates how important it is for us as census champions and advocates to continue pushing self-response, knowing that the Bureau has been letting folks go. Anna shares that they have a community-based and health subcommittee meeting on October 7th. They've requested the Bureau to participate to give updates. They stated they have no updates. This is very confusing. Yes, I agree. This is extremely confusing in terms of what is actually happening. And so at this point in time, the Census Bureau does not have, like, as I shared, an operational plan, an operational update in terms of how they're planning to handle the month of October. Unfortunately, at this point in time, we are, sorry, I'm getting more comments in. In terms of how to manage this, again, we're going to continue pushing the September 30th deadline. And then once we continue, because a lot can happen in the next 72 hours in terms of what happens at the court, or maybe Congress actually does get something passed. So with all of this in mind, we'll continue to keep you posted, but really where we're at right now is continue pushing September 30th, and post September 30th, really the messaging is going to be respond to the census ASAP, because we don't know when this period of responding is going to end. Julie from South Texas shares that they're going to continue to count as if October 31st is the deadline. They're promoting until we hear a final word on deadline. They're not stopping. Our goal is to keep the momentum. I love the fact that you're continuing this momentum and keeping it going, and while monitoring what is going to happen with the deadline. And I agree. I think, again, the importance here is to keep the urgency, to keep the momentum, to continue empowering our communities to self-respond to the 2020 census, because ultimately that's going to get us our self-response numbers higher, our total response numbers higher. And again, I want to apologize for not having complete information, but do know that as the information continues coming in and is being shared, we'll continue to keep you all updated. Our Twitter page, our Facebook page, we'll make sure that those are updated, because we know a lot of y'all tune into those. And as I shared last Friday, we did kind of a special update via our newsletter channel. And so if we get another big announcement, we'll make sure to send that blast out as well. And feel free to share that blast with any partners or coalitions that you're part of, so you can kind of share some more information in terms of where we're at with the count, or what it's going to look like moving forward. I'm going to pause there one more time to see if we do have any additional questions, comments, or concerns, and then I'll pass it over to Genesis. And Genesis, Lila, if you have any other thoughts or feedback to share with folks, feel free to chime in.
Hey, Katie, there's a question in the chat from Maria Camacho. She asks if the date is extended, are numerators extended also?
I don't actually have the answer to this question. Genesis, I don't know if you have the answer to that right now. I'm going to pause to see if you do.
So I think the answer is yes. If there's any, I see that there may be some census staff here on the line. If they also have an answer, we'd be happy to hear it. But I don't think that the Census Bureau can stop counting until there's kind of a final stay. So enumerators should not be dismissed. We have heard reports that they're being dismissed early, but it may be in regards to where they are located, right? If they've already finished their lists. And then I see Dr. Valencia is also adding. some information in the chat.
Yeah, the thing that I added, Genesis, is just the press release that was released by the Census Bureau in response to that court order. And it very specifically says that field staff should continue with the current operations until updates can be provided. There are very few places in the state of Texas that have completed their NERFU workload at 100%. And so my suggestion to, I believe it was Anna Anna McNaught, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name incorrectly, but you asked about, how you have a community-based and health subcommittee meeting on October 7th, and that you've requested the Census Bureau to participate, but they have stated that they have no updates. I would reach out to their partnership coordinator, and if you let me know what area you're in, if you don't know who the partnership coordinator is, we can put you in touch. But I think we need to continue to engage the Census Bureau staff in support where they can support throughout this extended timeline, because like I mentioned, the statement from the Census Bureau only speaks directly to field staff. So there may be other staff that are not available, but it's important to get that information directly from the Census Bureau partnership coordinators and partnership staff, so that you have that available in case you have any questions. But the Census Bureau release does say field staff should continue.
And then Carlos shares, so we can continue promoting the U.S. Census, but cannot rely on any local support from our local census representative. So as I shared, a lot of folks, their last week was last week, but there definitely are still Census Bureau employees who are still working to promote the 2020 census count. And I think going back to exactly what Lila shared is there are partnership coordinators still very much in this doing the work. But yes, unfortunately, a lot of the more local on the ground people that you may have already been working with throughout this 2020 census season, I know a lot of them sent out their thank you emails and farewell emails last week. I got a couple of those in my inbox. So it's just a matter of reaching out to see who's still on board during this time. Myrna shares she was told enumerators would not be working after October 3rd. Again, I think we'll want to, that's helpful, but we'll also want to see what the Census Bureau shares out in terms of what their operational plans are as well. Felicity shares, injunction is on the replan. Judge Koh's injunction forces the Bureau to go back to their COVID-19 plan, so they need to enumerate through October 31st and only revert to proxy interviews after certain temps, not just one. And then Anna shared that they did reach out to Rebecca Briscoe, who is the regional coordinator, who shared that update with them. So I think we might need to go back to the drawing board on that one. And then Dr. Edwards shared, if the enumerators are not extended, we need to ramp up our operations in Northeast Texas. Also, why is the completion rate so high if the self-response rate is so low? We cannot see the enumeration numbers. I think Dr. Valencia will explain a little bit more about those numbers and what they mean. And Dr. Edwards, thank you so much for that energy in terms of ramping up those. It sounds like enumerators will be extended based off of what Lila shared, but also I have the Census Bureau statements on the screen right now. So in theory, they will be moving forward. But with that, again, this is just something I wish I had the answers, but we just don't have them quite yet. But when we do, we'll of course be sharing them out with you all just so you are in the know. But with that, again, I'm going to pause to see if we do have any other questions, comments, or concerns. I also probably need to check our Facebook page to make sure that nothing has come in yet, but I don't believe it has. Okay. With that, if you do have any other questions or thoughts pop in your mind, y'all know that you can ask questions at any point during this presentation. So continue using those chat, comments, Q&A boxes, and we'll field your comments and thoughts and questions as quickly as we can. But with that, I'm going to pass it over to Genesis.
Hey everybody, Genesis here. Thanks again for joining us. As Katie shared, we're pretty much in agreement with that strategy, right? We understand that this is a really confusing time for everybody. And I would suggest for folks, because this is something I was asked yesterday as well, that if there are questions about the deadline specifically, you know, someone saying, how much time do I have? Do I have until this or that date? To not get too wrapped up on the dates simply because it is confusing, right? And instead kind of go back to the messaging around how easy it is to complete the census. In the time that you have a conversation with someone, you could get started, you could log online, you could find your census ID, or you could call. And so kind of gravitate people towards a response rather than, you know, spending too much time on the date. And with that, can we go to the next slide, Katie? So here, I don't have too many updates or reminders, but I do want to share some things that have happened in the past few weeks. We do have a press release from NALEO Educational Fund on this specific ruling. We're keeping our eyes out on this too as well. And Katie, it might make sense for us to convene, to kind of convene and have a check-in with everybody in the next few days, but we can talk about that a little bit later on in the call. In addition, many of you know that the state of Texas, the Secretary of State, allocated $15 million in COVID relief funds for a campaign, for an ad campaign that's going to be targeting a census campaign essentially, and it's called Let's Count Texas. And so they launched kind of informally last week. And so you can learn more about the campaign. We have some information about this, but not too much. You may see it in your area, you may not. Because of the limit on time with this particular campaign, there are some areas that are not going to be targeted. They have their own kind of set of criteria of where they want to invest a lot of their ad money. So just keep this in your back pocket. We know that there are a lot of campaigns happening, whether they're hyper local, whether they're a little informal. And so people may be getting a lot of reminders. And I'll add this to that. I'm sure that you're receiving a lot of messages from people that, you know, they're getting reminders. Does that mean that they haven't been counted? And I'm going to talk about that in a second as well. If the date is September 30th, if the deadline is September 30th, do remember that mailed questionnaires must be received before this date. I would advise that people who, if you're getting questions from people who say, well, how much time do I have to mail it back in? Do remind them, you know, the last day as of now is September 30th. But don't delay. And if they're worried about it getting to the Bureau in time, do let them know that they have other options, right? When you do it online, you immediately get a confirmation number. You know that you did it. And so you can feel a little bit more secure. Similarly, when you do it over the phone, you know, you're talking to a representative and you're able to give them your information in real time. So do let people know that they kind of have options and don't let them get too bogged down in the details. Next slide. Some of the issues that have come up recently too, I want to point them out in case there is, you know, some of you may be facing this or you've seen it, or maybe you can add some insight as well. One thing is that we've seen in apartment complexes, a lot of managers of these complexes haven't let people, particularly enumerators, go into them. And so the Census Bureau created kind of a quick website where you can go and see, and you can pull up basically what allows you to enter. So anybody who's, you know, you may hear from an enumerator say, well, you know, I'm having a hard time getting people counted here because I'm fighting with a manager. So you can click there. And then what do residents of multi-unit residential complexes also need to know about the 2020 census? And then in addition, we know that there've been issues with no trespassing signs. People may, you know, not recognize the Census Bureau as a government official. And so they may be a little volatile at the door. If you're experiencing this or if you're hearing about this, please do let us know, because we do want to raise that to the National Census Bureau so that they can kind of touch base with law enforcement. They do have a process for doing this. And we have heard of this as an issue, but we're not quite sure of where. And so we would love your assistance if you can. Next slide. Another thing I want to bring up, because I think this is something that's likely has come up for everybody here, is that there may be multiple enumerator visits, and in addition, an individual may be getting a ton of touches, not just from the Census Bureau, but from other campaigns, text banking campaigns, phone banking campaigns. They may be getting, you know, mailers. You may be giving them something, and so they may say, you know, why do you keep pestering me? Why do you keep talking to me? If I've already done it, don't you know that I already did it? Well, one, we don't have that information, right? We don't know who has or hasn't done the census. So that's something that's come up. In addition, a lot of people have said, you know, what about multiple enumerator visits? Like I had someone come here, I already filled out the census before, why are they still knocking, right? It could be a number of reasons. I'm gonna go through them very quickly. One is that they may need to clarify info about your address. So you may have done the census using your address instead of the census ID. This may have caused kind of a glitch in their system. And so some of the addresses just don't match the one that's on the Bureau's list. They could just be following up with you to make sure that you're counted in the right place. Remember, the Bureau wants to count you once, only once, and in the right place. The Census Bureau may have two addresses on their list that refer to the same housing unit, and they need to clarify who lives there. So it may be that you have, you know, 123 like Park Lane B, and then 123 Park Lane A. And they may need to figure out, is this the same housing unit or is this two separate housing units? Because it looks like it's just one home. They need to clarify those things, right? Again, counting you only once in the right place. In addition, the form you submitted may have been incomplete or the answers were not legible. So, you know, somebody may have returned the form in paper and then they get, you know, they actually just kind of scribbled something and then it's not legible for any reason. They're gonna have to follow up with you, right? Because they want accurate data. Next slide. And then for some small number of addresses, the Bureau is conducting a second interview to make sure that quality assurance is there. So this second enumerator may not ask all the questions, but they may be conducting a short interview about the process. You know, was the person who came to the door polite? How quickly did it happen, etc. The Bureau is very, very big on, you know, doing their quality assurance. That's really, you know, the purpose of their job. And so this may be one of the reasons they come to the door again. In addition, and unfortunately, just because of the confusion, but the Bureau does, as many of you know, they conduct hundreds of studies, right? And so one of them is the American Community Survey, and they may be coming to the door for that reason. In addition, I'm sure you have people who say, well, I did a survey, you know, in January, and you may say, well, in January, the census wasn't out. So just remind them, right? You may have done a survey that wasn't the census, but was directed by the Census Bureau. And so the American Community Survey asks more questions, but it has pretty much the same purpose in giving us valuable information that will help us plan and to improve emergency services. And this is also a very key survey in improving and creating jobs. So just let people know, the questions are may have been a little different, and they may be coming to you to ask questions on the American Community Survey, but not the census. We know this is really confusing, but I want to offer this because there may be a lot of questions that are coming up for people. And then lastly, one of the things that we could really do to support them is to remind people to be patient with the Census Bureau and to be patient with these campaigns. You know, everyone is just trying to get the word out. And so again, we don't know who has or hasn't done the census, but we do want to, you know, make and facilitate the work of the Census Bureau as easy as possible, especially right now when we're going into this sensitive time where we're not quite sure when the census will end. And lastly, the Census Bureau has methods to resolve any duplicate responses, so you won't be counted twice. So if someone says, well, I'm not sure if they got my form, what do I do? Or, you know, like I did my form and a enumerator came, just let them know, you know, if you've already done it once, you're likely set. Don't worry too much about it. If it would make you feel better, you can do it online again. But if you got a confirmation number, if you talk to someone on the phone, or if you sent it in, you're likely you have been counted, right? But in case they want to do it again for any reason, let them know that there is a way to resolve any duplicate responses. And that, again, is why we need more time, right? And the Bureau needs more time is because they do go back and make sure that there are no duplicate responses because they only want to count you once. Next slide. And then, as always, you know, we have our resources here. Please, you know, make sure to take a look at them and see if they're, you know, useful to you. We have our back to school toolkit. We created a Broadway collaboration video. We have our NERFU guidance for partners, both in English and Spanish, and then our census FAQs, also both in English and Spanish. So all of these here are linked. You can check them out at your own time. Next slide. And then lastly, as many of you are also moving into, GOTV, and I do want to highlight too that one of the things that we'll have to think through and strategize on is how we're going to do census and voting at the same time if there is an extension. A lot of people, they confuse the two. So that's another, hurdle we're going to have to cross whenever we get there, but we'll put that in, the back burner for now. But I do want to, reiterate that we're also here as a partner for any kind of GOTV. If you want to do any informational trainings, Facebook Live events, or kind of any earned media opportunities, please let us know. One thing that has come up for us is that sometimes we have either national or statewide media come to us for an opportunity in different parts of the state. And sometimes they're not the best opportunities for us because we want a hyper local perspective on the issue. And so we would love to be able to, send any media to people if they want, to get any attention on their own campaigns in their own regions, or to highlight individuals or families who are being impacted by either the census or voting. In addition, we have our bilingual voter hotline, which is 888 VEI-VOTA. This is live already. We have trained bilingual staff that provide voter and election information. They can check on the status of someone's voter registration, and we'll be providing support with issues at the polls. So if you have any, bilingual community members who have any questions that you may not be able to answer with regards to voting, send them our way. We're happy to help them. And we would love to collaborate with you on putting this number anywhere or everywhere that you'd like. And then in addition, as I've shared before, if you need any swag, if you're doing direct census outreach and you're in the field, please let us know. We'd love to send you some of the stuff that we've got. Right now we have a lot of pens, pins, and sunglasses, but we're hopeful that we're gonna get some face masks coming in soon as well. So if you need any of those things, let me know. I'm happy to collaborate. And with that, I think I'm done. Katie, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Genesis. I don't believe that we have any questions or comments right now, but if anyone does have any, again, feel free to use the appropriate channel to get those into us. Now I will pass it over to Dr. Lila Valencia to walk us through the data.
Hi, Katie. Thank you. And I do see a couple of questions. I'm not sure if these were already addressed, but Dr. Edwards was wanting to confirm a figure, a dollar figure. I'm not sure if this is on the media campaign or not. Dr. Edwards, can you, I guess, confirm what you were inquiring about with that dollar amount? And then I think I saw another question in the meantime while Dr. Edwards responds. It said something about, Catherine said, we tried doing a large social media push and were denied because Facebook and Instagram consider this political. Has anyone else experienced this?
I can answer that question about social media.
Great.
I will say, Catherine, I'm going to put in our chat box the link to our webinar on Facebook advertising. Unfortunately, there's no way around those ads being considered political. And so we did a webinar a couple of weeks ago just on getting verified to run those ads. It is something that you can do within a couple of hours to start running ads. There's a such thing as temporary verification. We provide step-by-step kind of instructions on getting personally verified to run ads and then having your organization verified to run ads. It's a little tedious, and I think what detracts a lot of people is when you start, they say, hey, it's going to be a couple of days before you can get verified, which isn't entirely true. There's a such thing as temporary verification, so you can start some ads, but then you have to wait maybe 3 to 5 business days to get something in the mail. And typically your temporary verification lasts all the way through the time you get that. So if you're interested in starting a big social media push and doing some Facebook advertising, I would just go ahead with starting the verification process. We all know that the census is not political necessarily, but Facebook and Instagram just do consider that a special ad category. So I'll direct you back to that webinar. And then the second thing I wanted to say about that is that we will keep you posted if the census deadline is extended through the end of October. There will be a period, and this is more related to the elections than it is to the census. There will be a period where Facebook will not allow advertising of any kind that falls under that issues, causes, or electoral restriction. And so we'll keep you posted on that specifically, but please continue moving forward. We do hope you find that webinar useful, but please email info@texascounts.org if you need any additional support on doing that social media push.
And Dr. Edwards confirmed it was the allocation to the media group, and I believe the grant from the governor's office was up to $15 million. Okay, I will get started with the data update. Katie, if you wouldn't mind forwarding to the next slide. Thank you. So just as a recap, right, these are the resources that we provide or that we use to provide you information on the data updates. So the Census Bureau's response rate data, which now has a number of different measures, the Census Bureau Tableau dashboard, the CUNY Hard to Count map, and then the Texas Demographic Center map and dashboard. I don't have a lot of information referring to the bottom two sources today, but the first two links, I will definitely share some information from there. Next slide, please. So where are we in terms of self-response? And I'm going to start with self-response because these are the data that we've been working with from the beginning, right? And these are the data we're most familiar with, that we can tell whether we're moving up or we're staying stagnant. So I'm going to start sharing this information for you. So right now, the state, and these numbers on the left are a little bit updated compared to the numbers on the right, because the census self-response data are still only updated on weekdays, whereas the Census Bureau's total response rate data are updated daily. And so on the left, you'll see the US is at 66.4% self-response. Texas is at 62.1% self-response. We're still ranked at 38th. A total of about 97.7 million households are estimated to have responded already, and about 7.5 million of those are Texas households that have self-responded. And again, this is derived from the initial figures that we were using, that the Census Bureau was offering. Next slide, please. So now we get to the 2020 census total response, where the Census Bureau is providing that an estimate that the state of Texas is at 98.2% enumerated. And so that enumeration total, or total response, is the percent that is self-response, so the 62.1, plus the percent that are enumerated through the NRFU operation. As you can see there, we have enumerated 98.2%, 36%, a little bit over 36% of that workload has come from enumeration during non-response follow-up, and about 62% of that, 62.1, has come from self-response rates. So Texas ranks 38th in self-response, 11th in NRFU response, which means that an incredible effort was placed and implemented in Texas by the Census Bureau, and we are about 29th total enumerated. When we look at the total enumeration, what remains of that 98.2, so that 1.8% of the population, is still over 200,000 households that have not been counted. Not been counted by the Census Bureau yet, not been self-responded. And so that's still a significant share of the Texas population that has not been enumerated. And so I'll share just a little bit of research that has come out of Texas A&M when they are looking at projections of congressional seats for the state of Texas. Their threshold that they are presenting in some recent analysis is that an undercount, a significant undercount in Texas could take away one of those 3 congressional seats that we've been working with under the assumption that, you know, we're projected to get those 3 congressional seats. That threshold is so low, it's 200,000 people. So right now, if this is where we were to end in the next couple of days, then Texas would surely not gain those 3 full congressional seats, but rather only about 2 of those. And that doesn't only depend on the Texas complete count, but also the complete count for all of those other states that are poised to gain a congressional seat. So places like Arizona and Florida. And so a significant undercount in any of the states, of course, then rearranges the number of congressional seats to be allocated. Next slide, please. And this here is the Census Bureau non-response follow-up by census area office map. This is kind of the only information that we have at the sub-state level right now. The information that's provided here is the percent of the workload that has been completed by the Census Bureau in these area census offices. The area census offices with the lowest performance, the lowest share of workload completed are in Fort Bend County, or not Fort Bend County, but the Fort Bend area census office, which still has or has completed 87.5% of their workload. The Laredo ACO at 93.1, same for El Paso ACO. Lubbock ACO is at 93.6, and then Hidalgo, Cameron County ACO at 94.5% completion. And so in that press release from the Census Bureau from Friday, this field staff really have a lot of work remaining to do in these particular area census offices in the state of Texas alone. And so we know that the extension of that timeline will be critical to getting a complete count in these, or a more complete count in these areas. Next slide, please. And we have been looking at the census tracts that have the lowest self-response rate. So we've been looking at the bottom 20th percentile, and we have about 1,347 census tracts that have self-response rates below 50%. Though that's what the 20th percentile is. And when we look at those lower responding census tracts, generally they're distributed across the state. We found at least one census tract in 231 of the 254 counties. However, there are more census tracts in those lower NRFU completion ACOs. And so, Dr. Edwards, when you were talking about, you know, the differences between self-response and the completion rates, there is a little bit of an association between the completed workload of NRFU and self-response. And so in particular, we saw a lot of these census tracts in the Laredo ACO, the Fort Bend ACO, Lubbock, and El Paso. And so we encourage you to continue to look at those self-response figures, because they are still closely related with some of those areas where the Census Bureau still has work to do. Now, one of the things that we looked at was the race and ethnicity breakdown of some of these census tracts. And we have close to 48% of these census tracts have majority Hispanic populations, or populations that are 50% and above Hispanic. About 56% of these have a greater share of the Hispanic population in their census tract than the state does as a whole. So in the state of Texas, we have made up of 40% Hispanic population. These 56% of these census tracts have a greater share than that. 5% of census tracts have a majority African American population, and about 35% have a greater share of Blacks in their than the state in their census tracts. When we look to see for the overlap or a combination, we see that 77% of the census tracts that are in the bottom 20% have greater shares than the Texas share of the Hispanic or the African American population. And so we know that during these times of last minute counts, when we're really in that last stretch, we're talking about counting populations of color. We've known for a long time that these populations were going to be hard to count, and we see it still in the data. And so it's really important that we make sure that we're reaching out to these communities. And then on top of it, the Laredo, Fort Bend and Lubbock area census offices, what we know about them is that even though they're anchored with those major metropolitan areas of the city of Laredo, Fort Bend, and Lubbock, we know that the lower response rates are still in the overlap of high share of communities of color as well as high share of rural residents. So we really want to make sure that we're really working to get those counts. Next slide, please. So not all rates are created equal, right? We're dealing now with so many different numbers, and it's not surprising that you are having some confusion about what you should be relying on, what you should not be looking at. We have self-response rates for census tracts. We have total response rates for the state only. We have enumeration rates. We have NRFU completion rates at the area census office levels. There's a lot that we don't know about what's going on in the individual census tracts now that we're working with these, when we're trying to combine the NRFU enumeration rates with self-response rates. But what we do know is that Texas is still lagging in self-response from 2010. So we are right now at 62 or 62.1% versus the 64.4% which we were at in 2010. So in self-response, it's also still the most accurate census data. And so earlier, Genesis was talking about how, there may be duplicate knocks at a door, or, people who are feeling like they've already responded to the census, or they did a survey that they think is the census, or these additional knocks for quality assurance. One of the things that we know is that the self-response data are almost twice more correct than enumeration data that are collected, especially when it comes to the actual individual count of the number of people living within that household. And so what I'd like to say is none of us would ever encourage you to vote twice, right? That's not legal, first of all, but it's not something that we think would be beneficial for anyone. But the Census Bureau has really strong duplication procedures in place, much stronger with much better results than we might get through proxy responses, through administrative records, and especially through some enumeration follow-up information from other sources, from like proxies and vacancy rates and things like that. So one of the things I want to say is that if an enumerator comes to your door and you're not quite sure if you did the survey or not, it's okay if you did it back, in before April 1st or shortly after that, and you do it again. There will be no penalty. You will not get in trouble, and you will help to strengthen the duplication processes and procedures for the Census Bureau by putting them to work. And in fact, it's better for you to test that than to test the follow-up that might have to occur at your household, especially during this time period where we're so unsure of whether this extension will continue and for how long. So if you really don't remember, it's okay. Just respond the questions again, especially if there is an enumerator who's coming to your door. That means the Census Bureau is missing something from your household. So encourage the people that you talk to that if they really don't remember if they did it, that's perfectly fine. They can still go online, take the census. The Census Bureau will figure out whether you already have a census form or not. And like I said, that is not illegal. Now, enumeration does not mean a count. Enumerators go to a door. They may have to follow up at that same door for 6 times. But that means that once they go to that door those 6 times, or once they have used a proxy or they have determined that it's vacant, their workload for that household is completed. That doesn't mean that an actual count took place. So that's why I think we still need to rely on those self-response numbers and figures and really push for that self-response now more than ever. Really encourage people to not wait for enumerators, that it's okay if they don't remember if they did the census, that they can still go online or call that phone number and respond in that way too. And I think that's all I have, Katie, unless there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Valencia. I don't see any in the chat box.
Hey,
Genesis?
Dr. Valencia? Yeah. Sorry, Katie. John Lawler asks, in Travis County, our lowest responding tracks are centered around the University of Texas. In the TDC analysis of bottom 20% tracks around the state, are any of them also associated with university communities?
So, John, I wish I had a really good answer to that, because what's been really challenging is we have heard from people around the state that this has been a challenge, counting the communities that are living off campus in their college towns. However, we don't have that local knowledge of where those census tracts are. And so, what we know from hearing your feedback, as well as from speaking with the Census Bureau partners and understanding what their challenges have been, is that these census tracts continue to be challenged and have these lower self-response rates. And we have been sharing that information with the new media campaign, as well as reaching out to universities. The state demographer wrote an email to all of the college and university presidents about probably a couple of months ago, and sent that out to encourage the universities to help the Census Bureau understand where their off-campus student housing is mostly concentrated, and encourage some sort of campaign, some sort of response from their students in those areas. And so I can't tell you exactly whether the lower responding census tracts are coinciding with those areas, but I can tell you that we know that that's an issue, and we have been working on it. And perhaps other people who are on the Zoom call right now might be able to share information about what they are seeing in their areas.
Dr. Valencia, Angela adds that I know Brazos County has very low response rates. This is where Bryan College Station is. And then Dr. Edwards also adds, we are seeing this trend in Stephenville for Charlton off-campus housing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we have heard this before, and for sure it's helpful to get that firsthand knowledge from the people on the call. And so, you know, we've engaged in some efforts. We are encouraging whoever is still working on these efforts to, you know, try to reach out to those census tracts in particular. And then, like I said, we've put in our own campaign to reach out to the university presidents and try to get them to cooperate however they can with Census Bureau enumerators and getting out that count.
Awesome. And thank you so much, Dr. Valencia, for walking us through the data. And I know we are very quickly approaching 1 o'clock. So folks, if you do have to hop off the call, know that I'll send the slides and recording to you just to make sure that you aren't missing anything. But with that, we're going to go ahead and switch gears to get out the count efforts. But before that, Karen shares that they have same concerns in Wichita Falls for off-campus university students from this Midwestern State University, and that they've been working with key leaders from the college to reach out to their international students as well. So sounds like it might be definitely a theme among some of our universities and colleges across the state of Texas. Thanks for sharing, Karen. That rhymed. Okay, get out the count efforts. First, I could not start this portion of the conversation without saying a big thank you to everybody tuning in who has been leading census efforts for the better part of a year, over a year, less than a year, however long you have been a census champion and pushing GOTC efforts in your community to make sure folks are counted. I just did want to take a big brief moment and just say thank you. Thank you so much. I know this has been a wild, crazy ride, but I also know that we get how important this is for our communities to be counted. It has truly been an honor to be able to work alongside y'all through this effort, even though we've been doing it virtually. But before I get into our Get Out the Count efforts, I did just want to pause and say thank you, and also just thank you for your patience as we continue getting in new information to see how the 2020 census will unfold and come to an end in the next couple of days or in the next couple of weeks. But with that, if you are still looking for ways to engage, I shared this last time, but just wanted to put it before you again. The Communities Foundation of Texas, Angela Broyles, who actually oversees this project, is on our call right now. If you are able and willing to make some phone calls to folks in your region, I highly encourage you to sign up for a shift to make some phone calls. As you can see, registration form is super easy to use, and from my understanding, Shift Smart is a really easy platform. So if you are wanting to continue to make some efforts, or if you have some volunteers who are looking for something to do and a safe way to connect with community, please feel free to sign up for this or reach out to Angela. Her email address is right there. It's abroyles@cftexas.org. In addition to that, I know all of you are familiar with the Texas Counts Toolkit. We did put in some fresh graphics last week related to voting in honor of National Voting Registration Day. Do know either later today or early tomorrow. I'm very excited. Erin has put together some more graphics to promote the 2020 census in the last, in the however amount of time we have left to promote it. So keep an eye out for those fresh graphics coming soon. And then of course, we still have our countdown graphics as well. In addition to that, last week we sent out an elected officials social media toolkit. This was just, it's a very easy to use mini toolkit that electeds can use to promote the 2020 census via their platforms. With this, I think there's just a lot of really great information in it. So we'll make sure that you get a link to this as well. But we just talk about how to make some really brief census messaging, whether you can upload a video. I've been seeing a lot more videos coming from elected officials and from influencers and communities going up on Twitter and on Facebook. So those are great if you want to continue encouraging leaders or powerful voices in your communities to create those and share them out. And then we also have a lot of sample social media posts within that toolkit. I think we have about 10 in English and 10 in Spanish. Obviously, some of this is a little bit dated because we shared this last week, but it kind of gives you a good idea of what that messaging looks like, and you can change it to make it more applicable to your audience, but also the timeline that we're in now. So we'll make sure you have access to this. The Texas Counts Toolkit is linked here. Again, new graphics coming today. And then we have our elected officials mini toolkit right here. And we'll make sure you get the slides so you can have access to both of those. And now I want to pass it over to my amazing colleague, Robin, who is going to talk a little bit about what our next kind of 72 hours. Notice that I italicized it, put stars around it, because we're hopeful that the deadline will be extended past September 30th. But if we are going to be kind of doing this big push, this big energy, the urgency around the 2020 census, we did just want to share out from our amazing communications minds what that content can look like over the next 72 hours. So I'll pause there and pass it over to Robin to take it over.
Thank you, Katie, and hello, everybody. We've just got a couple of brief but really powerful things to share. Katie, let's go to the next slide. And so our social media sprint to the finish line, and notice we're not putting a date on that finish line, is a combination of three things: urgency, gratitude, and all stars. And with urgency, it's whether we really do just have through the end of September 30th or all the way to October 31st or somewhere in between, the call to action is still urgent. And as we reflect on what Lila shared, we're at risk of losing one of the seats in the House of Representatives that normally we should be accruing because of our larger population. And then, of course, the funding and disaster relief and everything else. We know all the reasons, and the urgency is strong. So we want to do the things that get people to say yes now, even in the last 72 hours, the last 24 hours, or the last full month, if we're granted that. Katie, would you go to the next slide? The next thing, this is a perfect opportunity to express our gratitude. Our gratitude to all of the grassroots folks who are still out there making sure that people know that they count and that they need to respond. our gratitude to our colleagues, to our elected officials, to everybody who's helped. And I love the fact that that Katie put the big thank you in there, because we feel an enormous amount of gratitude to all of you, our census champions. And this is an important moment to turn that around and be grateful to others as well. And what I've got screenshotted here is one of our grassroots groups, Arise, and they're continuing to do just great work, and we appreciate it. And it's easy to either look back and find something on social media, or look forward and find something that they're doing in the future or today, and just tag people on your social media channels and just thank them for this great work they're doing. Can we go to the next slide? And then All-Stars. So you as our census champions, you're already our All-Stars, but what I'm talking about here are the highest performing social media events and posts. For some people, it'll be a contest that you did on Facebook, where you gave away something for folks who did something. For others, it'll be a fun story on Instagram. For others, it'll be something on Twitter. For us, one of our highest performing posts ever was the Sesame Street resources. In the midst of a stressful time period, the counting, along with Elmo and the other friends at Sesame Street, was warm, was friendly, was reassuring, was welcoming. And the Sesame Street resources target our hard to count populations. And so still, these hard to count populations across the state are going to respond to the count. And so we're going to repost these, and we're going to update our calls to action. And so one of the things that we're doing is, has the count counted you yet? And I see that we've just got something in the chat. Raphael, can you tell us, was it a boosted or advertising buy that got rejected about Sesame Street? All we've been doing is just posting, and so we haven't been trying to purchase or boost a post. So please let us know. Oh, it was an ad purchase. Okay. And so in just a second, I'm going to ask Aaron to redirect to the link earlier. It's earlier up in the chat box about what to do about Facebook advertising and some ways to maybe be successful in the midst of that. And so for others of you, your most successful post across whatever channels you're using, may well be something else. Just think about doing that action, picking up that resource again. And then Katie, would you go? Before I do this one, I wanted to just, so Raphael is saying that in his community that Laredo responded well to those shares of Sesame Street as well. Yeah, they're one of the few brands. They're sort of like the Dolly Parton of public media. Sesame Street really does have a good brand. And so while there are people who nitpick with them about various things, they're well loved, and those characters are well loved. And so if you want to borrow our All-Star post and send that out today or tomorrow as a reminder that the count is still counting, please do. And then to sum up this session about our last 72 hours with social media and with urgency, gratitude, and using our All-Stars, I want to ask you to think about, who do you want to thank? Who is still getting out the count and could use a boost? What was the most effective thing you did on social media? Also, are you trying to reach people with cell phones and limited internet access? If so, be sure to include the phone numbers and not just my2020census.gov or the web destination that you want them to go to, because we know that some of our folks are going to need to respond via phone. And then always include your why and their why. And so, sometimes our urgency is not the same thing that motivates our audiences. And we need to remember that, and sometimes it is, but their why may be that their community desperately needs funding. And our why might be representation or accurate data. All of our communities need funding though. And so be sure to include, when you're reminding people to get counted, why it's so very important. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate you guys so much. And Katie, back to you.
Thank you, Robin. And if anyone does have any social media questions, feel free to pop them into the chat box. And now the last part of today's call, and I don't want to spend too much time on this just because there is so much uncertainty, but I did want to touch on what happens on and or after October 1st, 2020. So for me, best case scenario, the count continues. So if the count continues past September 30th, come October 1st, know that Texas Counts is planning to continue to send out guidance, messaging, and updates. With that, I think Genesis hinted at potentially doing a convening later this week once we have more information. We would be more than happy to host something along those lines to, again, share out information as well as what folks are planning to do as fingers crossed, the count moves forward into October. But do know that in terms of next steps past September 30th, we're not necessarily going to share and publicize that until we have a better understanding of what the deadline is going to look like. But do know that we are preparing and we are ready to take this to the end of October 31st with all of you all. On the flip side, let's say that our count is cut short. September 30th is our last day. Do know that Texas Counts wants to pivot into more of a reflection and gratitude space. With that, so many of you have been involved in this effort and it has not been easy. And I think it's really important for us to take some time to reflect on what we've accomplished so far, or not so far, but what we've accomplished with the 2020 census, but also look towards the future of 2030 and think about how we can, and hopefully, fingers crossed, knocking on wood, we're not going to be experiencing some of the extreme difficulties we had during the 2020 census season. But I do think it's worth sharing just the amazing efforts that you all have led over the past several months, over the past year, to promote the 2020 census. So we are going to want to reach out to you, engage with you to do more of a reflection piece, but also just have extreme, immense gratitude for all of the work that you have done. Regardless, we're going to want to follow up with folks and do this kind of reflection evaluation piece. But hopefully our next communications with one another are the count continuing and what those next steps are going to look like. So keep an eye out on our socials, keep an eye out in your inbox, and we'll continue to share out information in regards to what's going on with the count. So send all your good thoughts and vibes and whatever else to the courts and to Congress so that we can get the census deadline extended and continue counting our communities. But with that, I am going to pause to see if we have any other questions, comments, concerns. I know we're 15 minutes over, but we'll pause one more time for questions. But if not, we'll go ahead and wrap up and we'll send you the recording and the slides as well. Oh, awesome. Felicity said they just launched a $200,000 digital ad campaign in Harris County. That is amazing. Looking forward to seeing the content from that. Congrats on securing that and launching that, Felicity. Of course, Raphael, thanks for joining in. All right, friends, with that, we are going to go ahead and conclude today's census update. Again, we promise to keep you posted on the most recent news regarding the 2020 census. But if you haven't already, again, this is my plug to follow Hansi Lo Wing on Twitter. He is amazing. He his reporting is just spot on and has been a big benefit to me. So if you are wanting to follow along with me, follow him on Twitter. That's the most recent information, relevant information you're going to get regarding operational updates and the court decisions. But with that, I am going to go ahead and close it out, sending lots of love and good vibes to all of you as you continue the urgency around the 2020 census, and we'll be in touch soon. Thanks, everybody.